Hello, cruel, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahaminous. Now, this episode is about 5 subtle hidden signs that you might have autism. First of all, I'm going to briefly outline the diagnosis of autism, what that is. I'm going to give you some stats. But if this episode was a pie, then the meat would be those 5 hidden signs. So I'm not talking about the obvious stuff that's really easy to diagnose. I'm talking about that stuff that might fly under the radar, that might make you question yourselves or your loved ones. This is a 2-part video, so as a bonus on part 2, I'm going to do a separate episode which is specifically about how people with undiagnosed subtle autism might struggle in romantic relationships. Just to very quickly blow my own trombone in terms of my expertise, so I'm an expert witness. I've assessed thousands of cases for court in my career. I give evidence in court. I assess people in prisons, usually offenders. I wouldn't say autism is a very common diagnosis in the people that I see. And in fact, the vast majority of people with autism obviously do not commit violence. But occasionally I come across somebody in my career who already has violent tendencies like antisocial personality disorder, and having autism can exacerbate those traits. So it doesn't cause it, but it kind of exacerbates the underlying propensity towards violence. So if you want to know more about that, you should go and check out my video on John T. Bravery, always be progging. It's a horrific, sad story. If you remember him, on August the 4th, 2019, John T. Bravery, who had autism, who was 17 at the time, he randomly threw a 6-year-old boy off the 10th story of the Tate Modern. So I've done a video about that. In fact, it was my very first video on this channel. I was so young and carefree back then, 3 years ago. Okay, let's jump into things. So what is autism? Well, it is a developmental disorder. It's related to brain development. So basically what I'm saying is that it's there since birth. It's not something that you can catch after one too many shandies during Freshers Week. I know what you got up to. And the symptoms of autism can broadly be categorized into 3 areas, which are social interactions and communication, inflexible or repetitive thoughts or patterns or behavior, and hypersensitivity to sensory stimulation. So that's all good in theory, blah, 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 but what does that mean practically? Here are some specific examples from each category. So category 1 for autism in adults is social interactions and communications. So that could be difficulty making conversation, it could be difficulty maintaining close friendships, discomfort making eye contact during conversations. It could be struggles in understanding sarcasm, whatever, or idioms, and it can be trouble understanding facial expressions and body language. And on top of all of that, there can be some problems in reading the emotions of other people. All of this understandably can lead to social anxiety. Number 2 category of autism in adults is inflexible or repetitive thoughts or patterns or behaviors. So these individuals can have repetitive like movements, or that could be routines or interests, or they might say the same thing again and again without any discernible reason. But specifically, they might have issues with dealing with changes, and they might need to arrange things in specific order. They might say the same things over and over again without any discernible reason. They might have a restricted range of interests, so only a few activities, but they do those things intensely, and they might have a preference for solitary activities. Number 3 category of autism in adults is sensory processing. So autistic adults may have like a hypersensitivity to sensory stimulation, such as sounds or smells that don't seem to bother other people, or bright lights, for example. I would add that autistic people can excel in certain areas, certain subjects, so typically things like maths, art, science or music, and they can be very strong auditory or visual learners, and they might be able to learn and remember things in great detail and hold on to information for a very long period of time. Now, I'm sure the swottier geeks amongst you might have been thinking ahead, and you might be able to see how some of these particular behaviours or symptoms could hinder or even ruin a romantic relationship. If you want to know more about that, you have to be patient, my young Padawan, because I'm going to address all of that stuff in part 2, my second video. Okay, so it's one thing just listing symptoms, but I think it's more interesting if we together explore not just the obvious symptoms that I've mentioned, but the subtler, more clandestine, the more hidden, the more obtuse, the more secret signs of autism. If some of these seem familiar to you, maybe it's telling you something about your neurodiversity. Okay, enough foreplay. Let's get into the signs. Cue the music. Okay, number one hidden subtle symptom that you might have autism is the smell of a croissant is intoxicating. So obviously I'm talking about sensory sensitivities. So people with autism often have usually heightened, occasionally diminished senses, which can lead to sensory overload and it can lead to avoidance. So this can manifest in sensitivities to not just sounds, but also even textures and smells. So basically, it's almost like you're a human mood ring. So here's an example, right? So you and your friend, you go into a cafe and you both get a double mocha cappuccino and you both get a croissant each. And you both enjoy it, but your friend, she's like, she's taking some huge bites like a slob. She's speaking with a mouthful, bits of crumbs are flying out everywhere, and she's just droning on about her cousin, how her cousin has been stealing her clothes. She's spitting crumbs all over the table, and it's sacrilegious. And it's kind of ruining your vibe because from your experience, the smell, the textures, that flakiness in your mouth, and obviously the deep Parisian tastes are amazing to you, and you want to savor it. And anyway, that jumper was heinous. So I admit it, that was an above average pastry, but that is not the reason, and that's what I'm trying to get down here. The reason is because it's your heightened sensitivities to sounds, and in this case, the textures, the taste, the smells. So it's kind of like you've got your own superpower, but I've got to be honest, you're not going to thwart many criminals. So for next year's Christmas dinner, we all know that your grandmother is gassy at the best of times, but you throw in Brussels sprouts and that is a lethal concoction. So if you have sensory sensitivities related to autism, in my view, that's a strong argument of why you shouldn't sit next to her next Christmas. Okay, number two hidden subtle sign that you might have autism as an adult is you get really upset when you have to take a new route to work because you have to drop off your kid brother to big school. And it's not just because your brother's conversation is like listening to paint dry because he only talks about Pokemon power cards. It's beyond this for you. It's actually about the disruption in your deep loved routine. So you've got a strict schedule for everything. Everything's got a time and a place, from your morning routine to your snacking habits. And a deviation of this can send your knickers into a rotation. So I imagine, aside for us all guys, that your morning routine is probably quite similar to mine. Personally, I do 3,000 press-ups, I brush up on my nuclear physics, and then I solve a Rubik's Cube while I'm taking my morning dump. You know, the usual. So although most people are used to and might even enjoy their routine, autistic individuals thrive on predictability and routine. So changes in their daily schedule are not just slightly mildly annoying, they can actually be overwhelming and they can be quite distressing. Okay, quick break, quick stats. So what's the prevalence of autism? According to the National Autistic Society, around 1 in 100 people in the UK are autistic. I personally think it might be a bit higher than this, but I suppose it complicates things when you talk about the spectrum, don't you? Because there's some people that will have some symptoms but not a full diagnosis. So a lot more people will have some of the symptoms but not necessarily the diagnosis. And on top of that, a lot of people remain undiagnosed, particularly as it happens in girls and in minority ethnic groups. There are specific socioeconomic reasons for that. Can't get into it all now. But if you've got any comments about why you think certain ethnicities don't diagnose it as much as others, let me know your thoughts in the Schmomments section below. The average age of diagnosis in the UK for autism is pretty young. It's 5 years old, although it can vary significantly because it depends on when that child or individual or even adult actually has these behaviours and symptoms that bothers them to the degree that they present to mental health services. And nowadays, as you probably know, there's lots of clinics that diagnose adults with autism. Personally, I think it's a double-edged sword because I think a lot of people might be just have a few sort of quirks of their personality and might be being diagnosed inappropriately. But that's a whole different topic. Again, let me know your thoughts in the Schmomments section below. Okay, number 3 subtle sign that you might have autism is that Andre and Marshall are the only people who actually get your jokes. So your sarcasm is so sharp that it can actually take someone's eye out. People often mistake it for being mean, but you're not trying to be mean, you're just trying to be funny. So what I'm saying is you have a unique sense of humour. Your jokes are so inside that their own gravity forces them to collapse inside themselves like a supernova. Don't worry, I'm not sure what that means either. What I'm trying to say is that your jokes are so inside that only a couple of your friends get them. But that's okay because you find them hilarious. Maybe you don't even care what other people think. So you don't find Brad from Accounts hilarious like everybody else. In fact, you find him a little bit contrite and a little bit annoying, and you've secretly fantasized about him choking on his sausage roll at lunchtime. So what I'm trying to say in this unnecessarily aggressive way is that autistic individuals may have a unique sense of humor, or they might struggle to understand other people's humor, especially if it relies on social cues or implied meanings. Okay, number 4 hidden subtle sign that you, yes you, might actually have autism is that you confide in nibbles. So you have a deep connection with animals. Your comprehension of empathy is different from other people. So you believe that animals understand you on a level that humans never will. They're not just your pet, they're your silent confidants, and they're your furry best friends. So let's get specific. When you explain to Nibbles how Jeffrey cheated on you, sure, to the naive outsider, it looked like Nibbles was just chewing on his cashew and he might have dropped a little pellet. But deep down, you know that Nibbles feels your pain. He understands and he cares. So whilst autistic individuals can definitely experience empathy, they might experience it in a different manner and they might struggle to understand the emotions of other people, especially humans. Okay, we're almost there. You can do it. Get you back into it. Number 5 secret sign that you might have autism is that you're actually secretly hoping that you don't get into the club. Before I get into that, let me introduce you to this channel. This is a Schmike for Small Minds. I am a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders. I make videos that are either about mental health or mental illness or criminality or the crossover betwixt the two. There's something for everybody on this channel if you've got time for a quick shrink. I implore you to subscribe. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but if you subscribe, birds won't poo on your car ever again. You don't have to drive around with that white muck on your bonnet. Guaranteed all your money back. So recently I've done videos of these sort of 5 signs or 5 tips. So 5 signs you might have a bad therapist, 5 myths about hearing voices, 5 myths about depression, including famous celebrities who've had both those experiences, hearing voices and depression. Go chickadee, check it out. Okay, back to the episode. Number 5 sign that you might have hidden autism is you're secretly hoping you don't get into the club. So you were having a great time in that old man pub, the Stag and Balls around the corner. The jukebox was broken, it was half empty, it was perfect for you. Toilets did smell a little bit, but there was a lot of space and there was lots of free seating. So basically what I'm saying is you're a fan of the quiet life. Loud noises, crowds around you, people brushing into you, spilling your drinks. That's your kryptonite. You prefer the peace and quiet of your own company or maybe just 1 or 2 friends. Autistic individuals might prefer solitude or small social groups due to this sensory sensitivities and separately also due to difficulties with social interactions. Okay, there we have it. Before we finish, let's recap what we've learned, because remember, the purpose of me making these videos is I want to educate you and get you thinking like a psychiatrist. Also want to take over the world, but it's going terribly if I'm being honest with you. Okay, so what have we learned today? Around 1 in 100 people in the UK are autistic. Officially, formally, I think it's higher. Autistic symptoms can be categorized into 3 areas: social interactions and communications, inflexible or repetitive thought patterns and behaviors, and hypersensitivity to sensory stimulation. I would say the third one is probably the hardest to kind of define and the more subtle. We also learned that your grandmother is gratuitously gracious. We know that autistic individuals prefer solitude or smaller social groups due to sensory sensitivities and due to difficulties with social interactions. Okay, so I've rabbited on enough for today. Look out for part 2. So part 2 of this video is specifically about how people with autism might struggle in romantic relationships. I'm not just going to give you general, vague kind of nonsense. I'm going to give you actual specific examples and scenarios. Buy my goddamn book and let me know what topics, particularly related to mental health, you want to know more about, whether it's 5 myths, 5 tips, 5 signs, hidden signs, etc., etc. Let me know in the Schmoment Schmection. And that's it from me. Have a blessed day. And do not forget, right, this is really important. Do not forget, I love you.